Alright folks, today I'm here to take you through the 5th volume of the Walking Dead comics, The Best Defense. If you haven't seen my videos covering the previous volumes up to this point, I'd highly recommend checking those out beforehand, as I will not be reintroducing the characters that we first met in those installments, which may lead to some confusion as the comics differ quite a bit from the show, but I will give a small recap of the last chapter before we get started. Now, this volume is certainly more action-packed than the last one, as it sees the introduction of The Walking Dead's first real major antagonist. And in my opinion, besides Carol, he is the most different from his show counterpart we've seen so far, so I'm excited to hear your thoughts on the story in the comments down below. And with that, if you end up enjoying this video, please consider hitting that like button and drop a sub to see more videos like this. After dealing with the rebelling prisoners, the rest of our survivors began to perceive Rick as someone who was losing control of his mental state, as the weight of leadership began to take its toll. However, with the introduction of Michonne, others would begin to show they weren't perfect either, as Tyrese would cheat on Carol, leading to an attempt on her own life while her daughter watched, but thankfully it wouldn't be lethal. But for Rick, it may as well have been, as he would directly blame Tyrese for her actions, causing a brutal fight between them that nearly kills the ex-cop. But the two would calm down when interrupted by Andrea, who reveals Alan had bled out from an amputation performed by Rick, following a bite in the prison tombs the day before. And after spending a day in recovery, Rick would wake up to learn the group had decided they didn't want him as their leader anymore. Instead, they wanted to form a council for decision making. And although he agrees with this move, he doesn't agree with their reasoning, as he believes they need to become brutal and savage in order to survive in this world. They need to be the Walking Dead. But now that there was no immediate danger threatening their lives, Rick and Dale would begin triple-checking the section of the prison holding the generator and library that was previously overrun, as they planned to move everyone into it soon. Here, Rick has a moment where he brings up how Morgan and his son, who he can't even remember the name of, have been on his mind lately, as he wonders if they could still be alive. Although Dale brings him back down to reality, as after all, it's been well over half a year since he last saw them. I kind of find it funny Rick made his way all the way back to the Atlanta camp just to put Shane down, but didn't spend a few extra hours to let Morgan know they had a fortress. That's something I appreciate about the episode Clear in Season 3. It makes it Morgan's choice not to come. But as the two meet back up with Tyrese, Glenn and Maggie reveal they had found the armory along with multiple sets of riot gear for the taking. The group speculates Dexter and Andrew must have gone in and out quickly as the dead closed in, explaining why they left so many valuable things behind. But Tyrese makes a comment about how they would have been a much bigger threat if they had got their hands on the riot gear, especially since it was bulletproof, which Rick takes as an underhanded dig, showing how there's still quite a bit of tension among the two following their fight. But luckily, Carol seems to be doing much better since her attempt, as she struggles to comprehend how she even went through with it while understanding how wrong it was to make Sophia watch. She fears Lori and Rick, who she has grown to love as their closest friends, hate her, but Lori reassures her they love her too. However, the way Carol says she's grateful for their love concerns Lori after the way she's misunderstood this connection in the past. Meanwhile, the rest of the group hopes to get the generator running, but they will need to siphon gas from the abandoned vehicles outside the prison to make that a reality. And with Glenn itching to go up against the dead in that riot gear, a plan is devised to get them out there before nightfall. However, before they get started, Rick takes a moment to say goodbye to Alan, as not only did he see him as a friend, he blamed himself for his death. But at least with him being buried instead of burned, he could maybe lie in peace. Or that's what Rick would like to think. Carl hasn't really had much of a role since the group's arrival at the prison, but that doesn't mean he hasn't been paying attention to the horrors around him, as he seems to be maturing at a rapid rate. He sees everyone else doing their part, and having proven himself to be capable of protecting others in his eyes, he believes he should be out there fighting with his father. However, despite his clear understanding of the world around him, Rick knows he's just not quite old enough yet. On the other hand, Alan's twin sons, Ben and Billy, aren't nearly as mature as Carl. They barely understand their mother and father's deaths, and now that they were orphans, Andrea and Dale would take it upon themselves to let the boys know they were going to look after them from now on, essentially adopting them as their own. But getting started by luring the roamers away from the gate, Glenn arrives dressed head to toe in riot gear while bringing Rick his own set, and once prepared, the two would take off, testing out the armor while discussing ways to make it more efficient for facing the dead. A much needed moment for the two, as by this point, they haven't really gotten much one-on-one time since Atlanta, but arriving at the parking lot filled with abandoned vehicles, they would get to work siphoning fuel. However, this would be interrupted by something extremely unexpected, as a helicopter flies directly over their heads before smoking up and crashing into the ground a few miles out. And after rushing back to the gates in shock, it seemed nobody else but Michonne saw it as she volunteers to go with them to investigate, revealing she had stolen her sword back over a week ago, which, in her eyes, proves they can trust her as she didn't use it. But Rick thinks otherwise. However, there is no time to deal with that right now, as the three pile into one of the fueled-up vehicles and take off towards the smoke pillar. Along the way, we get a moment of bonding I really like, where Glenn confesses to stealing cars back in the day, which he finds ironic with Rick having been a cop. But even he admits he might have taken a couple squad cars from his precinct, which Michonne then jokes about shacking up with a bunch of criminals. It's a short but really well written conversation, as it also reflects on how she just took her sword back without permission, which I think makes Rick understand it's not really a huge deal. I don't know, it's just moments like these that make the characters feel human to me. But running out of road on their journey, the three would continue on foot, encountering many roamers attracted by the crash that Michonne quickly dispatches with her sword. And as Glenn jokes about her being a samurai before the apocalypse, we learn she was actually a lawyer that had simply taken a lot of fencing lessons back in college to blow off steam. She only got the katana because she stole it from a neighbor she suspected killed her cat. However, using this moment of bonding to her advantage, Michonne asks for Rick to speak to Tyrese about the drama that went down, as she feels she is responsible for their falling out, which he does consider as the two were rather close before then. But finally arriving at the fallen helicopter, the three would discover nobody was inside. Instead, there were many footprints left behind, indicating to Rick somebody else had gone there beforehand and taken them. With a clear trail of which direction they went and a sign pointing them towards a town called Woodbury that seemed to be the closest to their area, Rick suspects they could be held up there in a store or some other building as they pursue the path despite the setting sun. Meanwhile, things are mostly calm back at the prison, although Lori finds herself furious with her husband for leaving without telling her once again, finding comfort within her friend Carol, who lets her know she's been thinking a lot, and has decided she wants to join her and Rick in their marriage. What? Her justification is that they don't need to follow the old rules anymore, and since her and Rick already love her, it makes perfect sense. But Lori is not having it, and lets her know they are not interested, as it would greatly confuse the children, which Carol takes serious offense to before storming out. But outside by the fence, Tyrese eagerly awaits Rick and company's arrival as the sun begins to go down, fearing they wouldn't have anyone to open the gate if they return, which Axel sympathizes with, pulling up 2 lawn chairs to keep him company for the night. Just another small moment with Axel I absolutely love. But finally arriving within Woodbury, the three would be left confused as nothing appeared to be there dead or alive. That is, until they wander into a pack of roamers who are suddenly shot down in rapid succession as spotlights blind our survivors, who are told to get down on their stomachs to avoid catching a stray bullet. Despite the chaotic introduction, the men who appear heavily armed claim they aren't there to hurt them. In fact, they just save their lives, as one of them introduces himself as Martinez, before officially welcoming them to Woodbury, the last little town on Earth. And as the three are told to follow him so they can meet the big man, he arrives at the gates to give them the tour himself. This is the governor. And according to him, the title is more of a joke, if anything. He appears to be relatively friendly at first, but shows disrespect towards Michonne as he asks to hear their story from Rick, in which they lie, claiming they've been roaming the wasteland ever since the fall. As for Woodbury, 4 entire blocks of the town have been secured with a 5th soon to be. They got lucky as a military safe zone nearby was abandoned as the soldiers took off to find their families at the beginning, leaving all kinds of weapons behind for the taking. But their strength against the dead has made them slightly desensitized to the danger, as they use roamers for entertainment, setting them up as a perimeter for a fighting ring. And heading into a back room, the governor confesses they had a couple accidents at first, but once they started feeding them, they went docile. And as Rick questions what the hell they would be feeding them, he lets the strangers know they feed them strangers. Clearly, the 3 have walked into something really bad as guns are raised to each of their heads. Here, Rick wonders if that was the fate of those in the helicopter, in which the governor admits it was. They were currently being chopped up into little pieces to feed the dead. He explains the helicopter came from a news station in Atlanta, and as some escaped while things went bad, someone sabotaged it, sending them straight into the ground shortly after taking off. But as the fights begin outside, the governor gets to the point. He knows their story is bullshit and wants to know where they're held up. With gear like that, they have to be pretty well off, so he wants everything they've got. And as Rick snaps back, refusing to tell them anything, the henchmen are ordered to pin him to the table, and to show just how serious he really is, the governor chops off Rick's right hand with one clean strike. And after lashing out in anger, Michonne manages to bite his ear off before being subdued. And with blood heavily running down the side of his head, the governor orders she and Glenn be taken to separate holding cells, while Rick is escorted to the hospital wing to be treated by a man known as Dr. Stevens. But why would the madman want Rick saved? Well, he is far from done with him. Now, what the governor would do to Michonne following her imprisonment can only be described as horrific, as she is brutally assaulted and beaten while Glenn is forced to listen in the cell next door as some form of sick torture to get him to talk by breaking him psychologically. But as she cries, she confesses the tears aren't out of fear for what he did to her, they're out of fear for what she's gonna do to him once she's free. But to the governor, these threats are empty as he makes his way back to his apartment while making small talk with the local children, which is legitimately terrifying knowing where he just came from. But once home, he would apologize for being late to a roamer child he had chained to the wall. This is his dead niece Penny, and he acts as if she were still alive, hitting her in the face before cleaning up her bucket of guts that he straight up says he hates the taste of. So you can add cannibalism to his list of crimes. But it gets worse, as the governor is delivered a box containing the severed heads of the helicopter crash victims, along with Rick's hand which he feeds to Penny on his way by, before placing said heads in fish tanks among the rest of his collection to watch like an effed up version of TV.
Jesus Christ.
However, Rick would wake up rather quickly after losing his hand thanks to the medical treatment given, but as he collapses after attempting to stand, a woman we would come to know as Alice would rush to his aid along with Stevens, just to be attacked by Rick as they are forced to sedate him. But as Rick calms down after hearing the doctors disavow the governor's actions while claiming they only stayed there out of fear, the monster himself would walk in to get his ear checked before letting Rick know plans have changed. Instead of interrogating him or torturing him, they're gonna send him into the fighting pits for a bit of entertainment. Michonne is gonna continue to be their prisoner, and Glenn was let go. As it turns out, he broke and gave up the prison, and if he's dumb enough to actually go back there, he'll lead them straight to it, striking dread deep within Rick. But before his arrival, things remain relatively calm at the prison as Herschel, Axel, and Maggie struggle to get the generator running while she attempts to get her mind off Glenn. Even Patricia gets her first panel in like 7 issues, as Otis attempts to make peace with her after letting her know she was dead to him a few weeks back, which she reluctantly accepts. But for Lori, today was filled with nothing but panic, as she, among the rest, feared the worst for her husband and the others after not making it home the night before. And as Andrea spends what she thought would be a normal day practicing sniping roamers from the guard tower, she would bring up her concern of being attacked by a larger group to Dale, which is rather convenient given the storyline we're entering. Right before a suit of riot gear is spotted sprinting through the field while fighting for their lives, and as Dale rushes out in the RV to bring them back inside, it's revealed to be Tyrese, who snuck out there to search for their missing friends in the dead of night. He wasn't able to find them, but he refuses to accept they're dead unless he sees their bodies. You see, it turns out Glenn wasn't let go at all. And as the volume comes to a close, we're shown a final scene from the governor revealing he didn't give up the prison. Rick did, with the look on his face when they took a guess. And now that they know, it was only a matter of time before they found it. Alright folks, that was The Walking Dead Volume 5, The Best Defense. As you can see, the governor is kind of just outright evil in the comics, whereas the show version puts on a front way longer, and gets nowhere near as sadistic, which I honestly think makes for a more realistic take. I will be adding tidbits from the novels as we go forward, but I think the mystery of not knowing who he was at the beginning made for a scarier intro for his character. But overall, I definitely prefer the show version of his introduction despite the insanity of Rick losing his hand so early on. The Michonne stuff is just a little much in my opinion. Speaking of the hand, I think this might be an unpopular opinion, but I enjoy the events surrounding it more in The Ones Who Live, even though they serve very different purposes. The comic is meant to show how threatening the governor is right off the bat while insinuating absolutely nobody was safe. Whereas the show portrays it as a sacrifice in an attempt to get back to his family. That's totally something I could see you guys having mixed feelings over, so I'm excited to hear your thoughts about this volume in the comments down below. But that's gonna do it for me today, folks. Thank you so much for watching.